Hello, this is Patient X Files, where the rare becomes real. Her shadow was causing pain. I never believed in the impossible until I met Sarah Chen. What happened to her defied everything I thought I knew about pain, reality, and the human brain. This is her story, and I'm still trying to understand it myself. Sarah walked into my clinic on a Tuesday morning that I'll never forget. She moved like someone carrying an invisible weight, her steps hesitant, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something that wasn't there. But what struck me most wasn't her obvious distress. It was the way she kept looking down at her own shadow. "Doctor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my shadow is hurting me. I've heard many strange complaints in my 20 years as a neurologist. Patients who feel pain in amputated limbs, people who see colors when they hear sounds, individuals convinced that their left hand doesn't belong to them. But this was different. This was Sarah telling me that her shadow, that dark silhouette cast by light hitting her body, was causing her physical agony. She was 34, a graphic designer from Portland, and until 6 months ago she had lived a completely normal life. No history of mental illness, no drug use, no head trauma. She enjoyed hiking, had a stable relationship, and loved her work creating book covers for a small publishing house. Her life was ordinary in the most beautiful way possible. Then the shadows began to hurt. "It started subtly," Sarah explained, sitting across from my desk with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She would be working at her computer when she'd notice a sharp, burning sensation somewhere on her body. At first, she thought it was muscle strain from hunching over her desk. She'd shift position, stretch, maybe take an ibuprofen. But the pain would persist, moving from her shoulder to her arm, then to her back, following no logical pattern. "I thought I was just getting old," she said with a bitter laugh. 34 and falling apart already. But then she noticed something impossible. The pain seemed to correspond with her shadow. When she sat with her shadow falling across her desk, her hand would burn. When she moved so her shadow fell differently, the pain would shift to match the new position. It took her weeks to make the connection because it sounded so absurd, even to herself. "I started testing it," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I would move around my apartment watching my shadow and the pain would follow. If my shadow's arm fell across a chair, my real arm would start throbbing. If my shadow's leg stretched across the floor, my actual leg would cramp up." The medical term for what Sarah described is referred pain, but this wasn't any kind of referred pain I'd ever encountered. Referred pain happens when your brain gets confused about where pain signals are coming from. A heart attack can cause pain in your left arm. Gallbladder problems can make your shoulder ache. But pain following the pattern of a shadow? That was neurologically impossible, or so I thought. Sarah's symptoms escalated rapidly over the following months. The shadow pain, as she began calling it, grew more intense and more specific. She started experiencing phantom sensations wherever her shadow touched objects. If her shadow fell across a hot coffee mug, she'd feel burning. If it crossed over ice cubes in a glass, she'd shiver with cold. Most disturbing of all, if her shadow overlapped with someone else's, she would feel their emotions, their anger, sadness, joy, as if they were her own. "I stopped leaving the house," Sarah told me, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I couldn't handle it anymore. Every shadow was a potential source of pain or overwhelming emotion. I started living with the curtains drawn, using only overhead lighting to minimize my shadow. My boyfriend thought I was having a breakdown. Her relationship didn't survive. How could it? Try explaining to someone that your shadow is causing you physical and emotional agony. Try describing the sensation of feeling a stranger's grief because your shadow touched theirs on a sidewalk. David, her boyfriend of 3 years, was patient at first. He suggested therapy, meditation, even a vacation. But as Sarah's behavior became more erratic, avoiding certain rooms, refusing to go outside during specific times of day, sometimes breaking down in tears for no apparent reason, he couldn't cope. He left on a Thursday, Sarah said matter-of-factly. I was having an episode where my shadow had fallen across a plant and I was convinced I could feel it dying. I was sobbing on the kitchen floor, begging him to move the plant, to change the lighting, to do something. He just looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. But Sarah wasn't insane. She was suffering from one of the rarest neurological conditions ever documented. A form of neuropathy so unusual that it doesn't even have an official name in medical literature. What makes it extraordinary isn't just the shadow pain phenomenon, but the visual hallucinations that accompanied it. Sarah began seeing things that shouldn't exist. Not typical hallucinations like monsters or distorted faces, but shadows that didn't match their objects. She would see her own shadow moving independently, reaching for things she wasn't reaching for, gesturing when she stood still. Other people's shadows would appear to wave at her or point in directions their owners weren't pointing. The worst part, Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely audible, was when I realized the shadows were trying to communicate. This is where Sarah's case moved from unusual to genuinely terrifying. The visual hallucinations weren't random, they followed patterns. Her shadow would point to specific objects, and when she touched those objects, she'd experience intense memories that weren't her own. A childhood birthday party she'd never had, a wedding she'd never attended, the death of a parent she'd never lost. These weren't her memories, but they felt absolutely real while she experienced them. She would smell the birthday cake, feel the wedding dress fabric, experience the crushing grief of loss. For minutes or sometimes hours, Sarah would live in someone else's life, feeling their emotions, remembering their experiences as if they were her own. The neurological explanation for Sarah's condition lies in a catastrophic miscommunication between different regions of her brain. Neuroimaging revealed unusual activity in her visual cortex, somatosensory cortex, and limbic system, all firing simultaneously in ways that shouldn't be possible. Her brain was essentially creating cross-connections between visual input, physical sensation, and emotional memory. Think of your brain as an incredibly complex telephone system. Normally, when you see your shadow, that visual information travels along specific neural pathways to be processed in your visual cortex. Your pain receptors send their signals along completely different pathways to your somatosensory cortex. These systems rarely interact directly, but in Sarah's brain, something had gone catastrophically wrong with the wiring. Her visual processing of shadows was somehow triggering her pain pathways. Even more bizarrely, this cross-connection was also activating her emotional memory centers, causing her to experience other people's memories as her own. The condition appears to be related to a rare form of synesthesia, a neurological phenomenon where stimulation of one sensory pathway leads to automatic, involuntary experiences in another. Most people with synesthesia might see colors when they hear music or associate specific tastes with certain words. Sarah's brain had developed the most extreme form of synesthesia ever recorded, one that connected visual input with physical pain and emotional memory. What triggered this dramatic rewiring of Sarah's brain remains a mystery. There was no obvious cause, no head injury, no infection, no family history of neurological disorders. Sometimes the human brain simply malfunctions in ways we can't explain or predict. Sarah's case represents one of those terrifying reminders that our perception of reality is far more fragile than we like to believe. Treatment proved nearly impossible. Traditional pain medications had no effect because Sarah's pain wasn't originating from damaged tissue or inflamed nerves. It was being generated directly by her visual cortex. Anti-seizure medications typically used for nerve pain provided minimal relief. Even powerful psychiatric medications designed to treat hallucinations barely touched her symptoms. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah discovered that certain lighting conditions could minimize her symptoms. Colored lights, particularly red and blue wavelengths, seemed to disrupt whatever process was causing her brain to misinterpret shadow information. Under colored lighting, her shadows appeared less distinct, and the phantom pain sensations diminished significantly. Working with a team of lighting engineers, we developed a system of colored LED lights that Sarah could wear like jewelry. The lights created a subtle but constant colored illumination around her body, effectively confusing her visual system just enough to break the connection between shadow perception and pain processing. It wasn't a cure, but it was livable. For the first time in months, Sarah could leave her apartment. She couldn't return to her old life. The condition was too unpredictable, the emotional hallucinations too overwhelming. But she could exist in the world again. 6 months later, Sarah moved to a small town in New Mexico, drawn by the strong, consistent sunlight and minimal shadows cast by the desert landscape. She found work as a remote graphic designer, specializing in digital art that doesn't require her to work with shadows or complex lighting. She wears her colored light system everywhere, a rainbow of tiny LEDs that keep her functioning. People stare sometimes, she told me during our last phone conversation. They think it's some kind of fashion statement. If they only knew these little lights are the difference between living and existing in constant agony. Sarah's case forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about the relationship between perception and reality. Her brain had essentially created a new sense, the ability to feel physical and emotional sensations through visual input. It was devastating for her quality of life, but from a neurological perspective, it was also miraculous. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of connections with other neurons. The total number of possible neural connections in a single human brain exceeds the number of stars in the observable universe. With that level of complexity, it's perhaps not surprising that sometimes these connections form in ways we never anticipated. Sarah's shadow pain syndrome reveals something profound about consciousness itself. We tend to think of our senses as separate, distinct systems. We see with our eyes, hear with our ears, feel with our skin. But at the neurological level, all sensation is really just electrical signals being interpreted by different regions of the brain. Sarah's condition showed that these interpretations can change, that the boundaries between senses are far more fluid than we realize. What's perhaps most unsettling about Sarah's case is how it challenges our understanding of individual identity. When she experienced other people's memories through shadow contact, whose memories were they really? Were they fragments of forgotten encounters absorbed unconsciously and reconstructed by her damaged brain? Or was she somehow accessing a deeper level of human consciousness that we don't normally perceive? The memories she experienced were too specific, too detailed to be random neural misfires. She described birthdays with specific cakes, weddings with particular flowers, deaths with precise emotional textures. These weren't generic memories. They felt like real experiences from real lives. Some researchers have suggested that Sarah's condition might provide evidence for theories of collective consciousness. The idea that human minds are connected in ways we don't fully understand. Perhaps her damaged brain was accessing information that normally remains hidden, tapping into shared experiences that exist below the threshold of ordinary perception. But that venture into metaphysical territory. What we know for certain is that Sarah's case represents one of the most unusual neurological conditions ever documented. It demonstrates the brain's incredible plasticity, its ability to rewire itself in response to damage or dysfunction, while also showing how terrifying that plasticity can be when it goes wrong. Today, Sarah lives a carefully managed existence in the high desert of New Mexico. She's learned to work with her condition rather than fight against it. Her art has evolved to incorporate her unique relationship with light and shadow. She creates digital paintings that play with illumination and darkness in ways that most artists never consider. "Sometimes I wonder if this is what I was meant to do," she told me recently. "Maybe my brain broke in exactly the right way to show me something about reality that other people can't see. The pain is still there, the hallucinations still happen, but I've started to think of them as information rather than symptoms." She's developed techniques for managing the emotional memories that flood through her during shadow contact. Instead of being overwhelmed by foreign experiences, she's learned to observe them with a kind of detached curiosity. She keeps detailed journals of these memory episodes, documenting the emotions, sensory details, and narrative structures of experiences that belong to other lives. "I've lived 1,000 lives," Sarah said during our last conversation. "I've been a child in rural Alabama, a grandmother in Boston, a teenager in love in Seattle. I've felt deaths and births and heartbreaks and triumphs that weren't mine, but they felt completely real while I was experiencing them. It's terrifying and beautiful and completely overwhelming all at the same time." Sarah's shadow pain syndrome remains a medical mystery. We understand the neurological mechanisms to some degree, but we can't explain why it developed or how to prevent it from happening to others. As far as we know, she's the only person who has ever experienced this particular combination of symptoms. Her case has implications that extend far beyond neurology. It raises questions about the nature of consciousness, the boundaries of individual identity, and the relationship between perception and reality. If our sense of self can be so dramatically altered by changes in neural connectivity, what does that say about who we really are? More practically, Sarah's condition highlights how much we still don't understand about pain itself. We've made tremendous advances in pain management, but cases like Sarah's remind us that pain isn't always simple sensory information. Sometimes it's a complex interaction between multiple brain systems influenced by factors we're only beginning to recognize. The colored light therapy that helps Sarah manage her symptoms has led to new research into the relationship between visual input and pain processing. We're discovering that light therapy might be effective for other types of chronic pain, particularly cases where traditional medications have failed. Sarah's story also demonstrates the importance of believing patients when they describe unusual symptoms. It would have been easy to dismiss her complaints about shadow pain as psychological problems or attention-seeking behavior. Many doctors might have prescribed antidepressants and suggested therapy without investigating further. But Sarah's symptoms were real, even if they were neurologically impossible according to our current understanding. Her pain was genuine, her hallucinations were actually occurring, and her condition required medical intervention, not just psychological support. This brings us to a larger truth about rare medical conditions. They often reveal gaps in our knowledge rather than problems with our patients. When someone presents with symptoms that don't fit our current medical models, our first instinct should be curiosity, not skepticism. Sarah's case will likely be studied for decades. She's contributed brain imaging data, detailed symptom logs, and hours of interviews to help researchers understand her condition. Her willingness to participate in research despite her ongoing symptoms reflects a generosity of spirit that's remarkable given everything she's endured. If sharing my story helps even one person avoid what I've been through, or helps doctors recognize these symptoms earlier, then it's worth it, she said. Nobody should have to convince medical professionals that their pain is real. The broader implications of Sarah's condition extend into philosophy and consciousness studies. If her brain can access memories that don't belong to her, what does that suggest about the nature of memory itself? Are individual memories truly individual? Or do they exist as part of some larger network of human experience? These questions venture far beyond medical science into territory that may never be fully answerable. But Sarah's case provides a unique window into the extraordinary plasticity and mystery of human consciousness. As I reflect on Sarah's journey from ordinary graphic designer to someone living with one of the rarest neurological conditions ever documented, I'm struck by her resilience. She lost her normal life, her relationship, her career, and her basic sense of reality. But she found ways to adapt, to create meaning from chaos, to transform devastating symptoms into sources of insight and art. Sarah's story reminds us that the human brain is far stranger and more wonderful than we often realize. It can break in ways that seem impossible, but it can also adapt and compensate in ways that are equally miraculous. Her shadow pain syndrome is a testament to both the fragility and the remarkable resilience of human consciousness. In the end, Sarah's case forces us to confront fundamental questions about reality, identity, and the nature of human experience. Her shadows may cause her pain, but they've also revealed aspects of consciousness that we're only beginning to understand. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Please write a comment what you think about this video.